Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Your Life Unfiltered podcast with your hosts, Kituko Thari and Deepam Jain. In this podcast, we dig deep into the life experiences of our guests to connect the dots between their upbringing and what they're doing today. In today's episode, we have special guest Vishal Jain. Vishal, it'd be awesome if you can introduce yourself for everyone.
Hey. First of all, I'm really glad to be on the podcast. Heard about it a couple of months ago. I'm glad to finally be on. Thanks for having me. A little bit about myself. I'm here in the Bay Area. I guess not too far from Deepam, actually. in Hayes Valley. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to school at Harvard. Did my undergrad and grad in computer science and finished in 2019. So it's been around 3 years now. Been working at a couple of tech startups, more in like the cloud and data spaces. And then now it's been around a couple of months, 5-6 months. We've been working on our new venture, a startup. And so that's we're working on founding that. And so it's been me and also my brother Varun. And so we were fortunate to get some funding there, and we're off to the races.
That is absolutely amazing. It's at such a young age you were able to start a startup. And so can you tell us a little bit about, why a startup? I know you're living in San Francisco, so that's definitely in the water over there, but I'm sure there's a story, right? It's like, why a startup? It's like you could have done many different things. Why a startup?
Yeah, I think we, even earlier on, growing up, we were exposed to more like entrepreneurial type of ventures, right? So I grew up in the East Bay. So interestingly enough, that area doesn't have as many tech people, right? I grew up a little bit east of Berkeley, so not that many tech people compared to like the South Bay Peninsula, SF. But both my parents were doctors and they ran their own like private practice, and so my dad always preached kind of like run your own business. He doesn't really like listening to other people tell him what to do and controlling his time. And I would see him work a lot, so I definitely knew that it's a lot of work, right? And I would compare it to people just working in hospitals, and some of them maybe had more controlled workloads at times. But I think that really rubbed off, being able to run your own business, and saw that with the grandparents too, like my grandmother, as well in India, running her own like OBGYN clinic, doing deliveries at the age of 80. And going to college then, and even in high school, actually, we would like record sitar albums, right? So we recorded a bunch of sitar songs, right? And I would go selling these albums, like physical copies of it, to people at school, right? And then I'd like pester them for money. It's kind of embarrassing, but people would eventually pay me like 10-15 bucks. So I think even from there, I kind of got into it. Getting out of college, I think we felt like we needed a little bit more experience for it and I. And so we wanted to work first a bit. But the goal was always to start something, right? And then I guess kind of the X factor there was like once we got into Y-Combinator and they basically give you money, it felt like there's not that much risk to leaving your job and just trying something, right? And if you fail, you fail. I don't want to fail, but hopefully you'll learn something from it, so you can do it again, maybe be successful. So yeah, I think basically like the amount of risk it takes these days probably is a lot less too. So it's easier to get started with everything out there.
Got it. So I have an interesting question for you, Vishal. So I know every Indian actually can relate to this, like people who have Indian parents. Since both of your parents as well as your grandparents were doctors, weren't you pressurized from a young age to become a doctor yourself? Uh, and obviously you didn't become a doctor, you became an engineer, which you are today. So how did you kind of navigate those tough territories with parents?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think what you'll find is that Indian parents that are engineers will a lot of times want their kids to be doctors, and a lot of the ones that are doctors will want them to go into engineering.
Interesting.
Right? And I guess in the Indian world, there's like those two things, and then maybe like being a lawyer or something else, right? That's a joke, but Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was any like supreme pressure to be a doctor. I think my mom would have probably preferred that, that one of us became doctors. I think part of the issue there with being a doctor, at least coming from my dad, was this feeling that there's a limitation on um, the entrepreneurial kind of like journey you could really have, right? Like you couldn't go and really build something that tons of people could use. It would be a lot harder to, I mean, I guess you could make a lot more money probably not being a doctor, right? And trying to just like be a successful startup person in executive roles. And so I think like I think like I think from some of the medical people I have seen, they kind of felt like maybe their creativity was a little stifled, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think with the American system now, for how long it takes, 4 years of med school, 4 years of pre med, 4 years of med school, doing residency, then doing a fellowship, if you're doing like surgery or something else, like I think it's shifted to something where you have to deal with insurances frequently. You don't make as much money as you maybe did like 10, 15 years ago. And you need to be like a lot more invested in like kind of the altruistic part of it, like helping people, working with people. I think it's like financially and economically makes a little bit less sense. So if you're patient and you're willing to go through all that, and
Hmm.
you're okay kind of like memorizing all this stuff that doctors have to do, right? Then I think it's like a great thing. It's a great profession to be in.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. It's definitely grueling, especially in today's world. And I work in healthcare, so
Yeah.
I can totally relate to
Yeah.
relate to that. So, could you tell us a little bit more about the startup that you're working on right now? What is it about? How did you come up with the idea? Any motivations that went behind it?
Yeah. I mean, what we're working on right now, and we're still early stage, right? We've been building sort of like data layer for security and privacy monitoring companies, right? So
Hmm.
something like a product so that security and privacy companies can integrate with all sorts of SaaS applications and pull data more easily. So they don't have to spend time like integrating with all the Dropboxes, Google Drives, Slacks of the world, and pulling data from them to do whatever they're doing, right?
Hmm.
And so the way the idea came there is that we actually had a brainstorming session with um, some like really technical folks we know well, and we were like, oh wait, like there might be something here because there's a ton of companies doing some other addressing some other use cases, but maybe not this one right now, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so from there we kind of started going and talking to people, and I guess going about like kind of validating the idea and the space is something challenging, right? And so you have to spend time doing that. Um, but yeah, no, and I think the way we kind of got more conviction in this is we tried out the alternative solutions, right? Some of the competition that's out there, even talked to some of the competitor companies, engineers that work there, to understand like what parts of the market are being served well in the SaaS data integration space, and
Hmm.
which parts of the market are not.
Got
Okay.
it.
Yeah,
Wow. That's so it sounds like you were very scrappy with not only coming up with the idea, but also validating the idea, right? Because it sounds like you
yeah,
did a lot of, I'm imagining you did a lot of cold emailing, cold calling to get in the door with a lot of these different people and these different engineers to get a sense of where the gaps are and where you could add value, yourself and your brother in the startup.
yeah.
So
I mean that's like an interesting kind of area, right? Validating early stage startup ideas product, right? I think it's really hard. I think there's not that much out there. I think that's like something I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, especially when they're newer and they don't have like a speed dial of like 20 executive founder level people that they can just call up and get feedback on, right? Um, and so there, I think you have to be really hacky, right? And if you're building, say, like if you have some like vision of what you want to build, right? Um, let's say your vision is like you want to build like a marketplace, right? That matches like students and internships, right?
Hmm.
Um, Now, the dumb way of doing it is going and spending 6 months building that whole marketplace, right? The smarter way of doing it is thinking, oh, well, a lot of like students probably want internships, but a lot of employers don't want to hire like high school students. So let me go and find some that do, and then let me just like create some sort of Google Doc, some really like low like something that doesn't involve much tech, just to maybe use Google Forms or something, right? And just to get an understanding of like, what do these people want, right? What do employers want? What do high school students want? What are their skills, right? How can I just get people to sign up to Google Docs or Airtable and do it, instead of like building out a whole site that may not get any traffic? So I think it's the early stage of being super hacky, doing things in a couple of days instead of a few months, right? And being
Right.
objective.
So
Tough.
basically, test your idea or MVP at the lowest cost possible before even
Yeah.
consider thinking about moving forward.
Yeah. So for us, like we would like maybe make like a document kind of showing like what our product is. So a potential user might think there's a product, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then we'll try to get a bunch of signups, and then we'll talk to them, right? And then we'll maybe build it out based on their interests, based on if they're willing to pay, blah, 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 right? Instead of going and spending like 2 months building something that you don't actually know how much of it will be useful, right? So try to get into the hands of users as early as possible. Yeah, I remember selling Figmas, right? I remember selling designs to people, right? And that was brutal, right? It's hard to get that to work, right? But um, you learn a lot about selling, about whether your idea is really good. If someone on the other side of your other side of your screen, someone at another business is willing to buy your product based off just a Figma, then you're onto something like huge. That's really rare. I think that's really rare for that to happen. But yeah.
I guess it also depends on sales ability, right? Some people can sell anything. So, but in general, completely agree with you. If you're able to sell something when it's in a conceptual stage, that means you have a product that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point, right? I used to think that like a lot of the sales ability mattered a lot, right? And I do think it matters, right? But early stage selling is not so much as selling as partnership, right? So if you take your big company like Microsoft, Oracle salesperson and stick them into like a very early stage 3-person, 4-person startup, they'll probably do okay, but they won't do that well, right? Because it's not about selling at that point. It's more about forming a partnership and showing that you're a trustworthy person, right? Because there's no product. You have like a couple months of work at most, right? You have one feature versus all your competition who has 200 features. So there's not that much you can sell. So you have to sell them more on like who you are as a person. And ultimately you can sell as hard as possible, but if your product is kind of garbage or isn't doing something 100 times better, there's no amount of selling you can do to kind of salvage that, right? So that's what I've learned, right? In the early stage, if you have to push too hard, you may have to push a bit, but if you push too hard, then your idea and your product just isn't there yet, right? And that's hard to kind of gulp and deal with. But
Yeah. And in some ways, just in your specific case, Vishal, as you kind of mentioned it before,
yeah,
you've been selling for a long time, since you were a high school kid. So you've gathered a lot of experience, what works, what doesn't work, and so on. So I'm sure that really helped you with your startup as well. Like when you started out, you were carrying all those experiences from your young childhood, and then through this particular venture as well.
yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens over time is that when I was young, I was selling to people in person, right? So you can kind of read their body language. You can spend time and understand like maybe why they don't want it. Over Zoom, it's a lot harder because you don't have the same like body language.
Mm-hmm.
Your People can avoid you, right? People can be like, oh, send me some like handouts and I'll like look it over email, right? And so early on, that was one of the biggest problems we had, right? It's like we're
Mm-hmm.
selling to people on Zoom, right? 6 months ago, we started selling to people. It's all mostly on Zoom, and we're completely failing, right? People are like, "Oh, just send me an email." We sent them an email. We don't hear anything back. Send them 2 emails. We don't hear anything back. 3 emails. One lady was like super excited, and she was like, "Oh, why don't you send me like a bunch of handouts so I can share it?" because some other team has to make a decision, right? And give me an okay, right? And I think the naive me was like, oh, she's like just maybe unsure, right? But usually those types of things, like sending an email or letting things go to email, is usually code for like, yeah, like I actually don't want it, right? Um, and it's like it's hard to figure that out, right? Because people are really bad at saying no, and it's especially easy to do that and like dodge that um, in like a Zoom online setting, right? Uh, so I got smarter on that now, right? Um, but yeah,
Awesome.
both.
That's a really, really good point. It's the subtext, right? It's like it's not exactly what they're saying, but what they mean is the subtle meaning behind what they're saying. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I've mostly found that like you don't really have like a true customer until they're using it, preferably paying for it, um, deriving a lot of value from it regularly. That you've like verified that, right? Um, so there'd be times where I send a contract over, a person's like, "Yeah, I'll use it." 1 week passes, contract's not been signed. 2 weeks passes, contract's not been signed, right? And so it's not just someone saying yes, but someone actually putting the pen on paper, right? Or giving you their credit card number, right? Even over the call, being excited about it. Um, those human behaviors are like the final step of like excitement, right? That you're actually like willing to use something.
And yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm sure navigating through funnel is probably
yeah,
the most amount of work on your day to day, right?
yeah.
Like,
so
mhm.
tell us a little bit about Y Combinator, right? So I know your brother and you started a startup, you got into Y Combinator. How was the experience of being immersed into the Y Combinator program?
Yeah, so
And
we're
sorry,
part of the.
before you answer that question, I just have a
Uh,
related question. So, how did you go about finding or securing funding? What was the process? If you can just uh,
yeah, yeah,
talk through those both of those things, that'd be great.
yeah. So we started off applying just like a day before applications were due. I think around like October-ish of last year, we got in like November-ish, December-ish. Um, you have to like apply, then they do an interview round for like 10 minutes, which is potentially really intimidating because there's tons of companies getting interviews. It's supposed to be rapid style. It depends on who's questioning you, which partners are questioning you. And so our application was for the winter 22 batch, right? January to March of 22. And we didn't have any customers at the time. We built a prototype, and it was really intimidating, right? Like the day before, I wasn't able to answer like really basic questions properly, right? And I think what they're looking for is confidence and succinctness in your answers, right?
Hmm.
With the ideas you're going for. And they're known for like interrupting you if you're like rambling on, right? So the rule is like spend 10 to 15 seconds max answering any question, which is crazy to think about, right? That's like crazy amount of
Hmm.
brevity. Um, so yeah, we got like one of the YC heads of admission, Dalton, interviewing us, and the people interviewing you end up becoming your partners. And so I think for them, for the experience there was like, oh, these guys are like engineers. They all went to Harvard, right? So they know like technical stuff, but see if they can like understand like go to market. They understand selling. Do they understand some of these other things, right? And yeah, I guess we're fortunate enough to like have tricked them into thinking we knew a little bit of what we were doing. But looking back, we did give some pretty stupid answers, and we got lucky that we got lucky that they didn't like ding us for it too much. But yeah, no. Then at the end, they make their decision the same day, right? So the day of the interview, we had it like at noon. Then we were like, we don't know what's gonna happen. Let's go get ice cream or something, right? And then we came back home, and then we got my brother Varun got a call for one of the partners, and you're hoping you get that call because that call means you get it, you're in, and if you don't get a call, that means you didn't make it. Um,
Oh,
right. So
awesome.
that was definitely fun. And quit your job. Um, and yeah, then the program itself was amazing, right? We got to work with really awesome partners that have worked with tons of successful companies. And so I think for them, they're able to distill common patterns in really successful companies, right? So they may probably not help on a lot of low level details around what you're building and the specific subject matter, um, but they do know a lot of high level trends, and a lot of high level mistakes people make, whether it's hiring, whether it's fundraising, whether it's building out product, speed of product, whatever, right? And so that's really helpful because I think when you're like a first time founder, there's like tons of things you can do wrong, right? But it's also good because I think the Y Combinator like community is a good community of founders. We got to see them like regularly. Every month there's like meetups and stuff. I see a lot of them regularly outside of that. And so you have a nice community of people to lean on, to ideate with, to ask a lot of questions around basically anything, right? I think the biggest thing here is that you should learn to rely on yourself to learn anything. Like you don't necessarily need to know everything, but you have to figure out how to learn anything and do anything, right? And have that level of like belief. And so in that sense, I think it's good to have the YC folks around the founders. They have other resources too. Like they have an internal forum called Bookface. So I guess Facebook reversed. But it's like a private forum, right, where a lot of people are talking about ideas they're doing, um, questions they have, right? And then they also have like an investor database. So good reviews, terrible reviews about all sorts of investors, who should take money from, who should avoid. Last ways, but um, in that sense, great experience, like once in a lifetime kind of thing. Would definitely recommend to anyone that either doesn't is like just getting started, or doesn't have like a huge network of like founders and investors. If you're like 8-10 years out of school, you have experience, you have somewhat more senior, then you may not necessarily need it. But at the end of the program, then so it's 3 months at the end of the program, you have demo day where you kind of pitch to investors, and you raise a little bit of money, um, seed round money. So we raised, but I guess yeah, some people raise up to like 4, 5, 6 million in seed money, and so learning like it made fundraising a lot easier because so many investors are interested in like Y Combinator companies. Um, you can raise at a decent valuation for your company, so you don't end up losing too much equity. And yeah, it's definitely not fun dealing with investors, not gonna lie. But it's kind of like a necessary evil that you have to do just to keep going, right? Yeah, love the experience, but super intense. Worked almost, I think for the first month I would take a day off work, uh, or a month and a half, I think. And then after that, I was working like every day, getting ready for like demo day, the day you present your company, your success, or you try to present your successes, right? So investors talk to you. Yeah.
That's
Fascinating.
awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I did have one question based off that last comment about it's difficult to work with investors. Do you have any stories that you either feel comfortable or allowed to share
Yeah.
legally? I don't know. I don't know if there's like some NDA related to like investors or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, my investors, I love with my investors. That's why you should pick people you want to work with, right? And that are helpful, value add. We were fortunate to get some really good investors from uh, really big funds, smaller funds, individuals, people with all sorts of experience, really technical people, people with some more marketing experience, people with security experience, sales experience, all sorts of things, right? Healthcare. And so we're fortunate in that we get a lot of different viewpoints. I think in terms of pitching, I think it's hard, because that can depend on like the environment you're in, your pedigree and your background, right? So um, I think when you're starting off earlier on, like if you went to like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, founders from those three schools end up usually getting like a lot more venture funding, disproportionately a lot more than like any other one. I think fourth is maybe UC Berkeley, right? So I think those 3 or 4 schools disproportionately get like a lot more funding. So I think there's a lot of like pedigree that plays a role in whether people are like interested in talking to you. Um, what I found with a lot of investors is that typically um, they'll have some sort of like preconceived notions a lot of times of what they find really interesting, what they find to be a big market. And so if off the bat, they don't really feel like something's a big market or a great idea, it's pretty hard to convince them otherwise, unless your like business is just killing it, in which case like every investor in the world would be interested. Right.
Of
Yeah.
course. Very interesting. Okay, so how long has it been, Vishal, since you've secured funding?
Yeah, so we raised a little bit of seed money in April. So it's been yeah, a couple months now. And then we
Got it.
got some pre-seed. I guess we were lucky. Funny story was that YC used to give 125K. And then on a trip back from India when YC was just starting, we heard a surprise announcement that they're giving a little bit more money. Obviously, they take a little bit more equity, but we decided to take it. So we raised 500K from them, and then a little bit. Yeah, we have at least $1 million, right, in the bank, and we'll probably raise more money in the coming months as we need to hire more people.
Excellent. So how's your day-to-day look like nowadays as a co-founder or a founder of a startup in San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually not that glorious. I thought it would be a lot more fun. It's a lot of like, I wake up, I try to like meditate, start the day off well, right? I think that's super important, to just be cheerful, because if you're talking to other people and selling to them and you seem kind of sad or depressed or not like enthusiastic about what you're building, then you've already lost, right? Even if you're doing your product's good. So a lot of it is like honestly messaging, cold emailing, like cold LinkedIn, right? Trying to figure out like new ways you can be hacky, how to get your product more distributed into the eyes of like people that may want to use it, right? I guess in the summer there's a lot more conferences that come up, right? So maybe you go to like a cybersecurity conference or like some developer conference for like data tooling or whatever, right? So you try to be like hacky there. A lot of times it's spent in calls, honestly, right? Trying to just talk to potential users, validate the problems they have. If there's something there, then pushing it forward and getting us try to sell something to them, right? And then I try to like code a little bit more in the afternoon, evening, if I can, take a little bit of break. We talk to a lot of people in Asia and Europe too, which is unfortunate because it also means that I have to work a lot at night. Not fun, but yeah, it's a necessary evil. Yeah, I think before I had a hard time figuring out like what was a good work schedule. Now I realize it's kind of working like trying to work like 6 days out of 7. Yeah, 7.
And how many hours are we talking per day on an
Good
average?
question. Good
Yeah, I
question.
mean, I don't track that too much. Right? I think the bigger thing is I do work a decent amount, right? But the bigger thing here is that you want to have clarity of thought in what you're doing, right? So one like highly productive hour where you're able to kind of figure out like what direction you want to take a product is a lot more valuable than 3 of just like kind of staring at a screen, right? So it because like it's like a couple decisions. What's amazing about startups is like in the early stage, every day you have all these small decisions you have to make. And there's all these random occurrences that happen, right? You cold message all these people and maybe a couple of them respond and a couple of them maybe become customers, right? And that is variable on who you're messaging. Even if it's the right person, maybe that person's busy one week, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe like one week you get lucky and you get the person that's an important person that might be a good customer, right? So there's all this like variances kind of in what can happen, but you want to try to get like all these small decisions over like a long span of time like become super important, right? And a lot of these small decisions you can go back earlier on in the company, right? Of course, if you have 30 people, it's hard to go back, but yeah, that's what I focus on, kind of clarity of decision making, and yeah, just kind of having the bigger picture in mind, right?
So it's almost like dating in 2022, right? You
quality
have
of
to
life.
you have to match a lot of variables there: timing, quality of person, whatever. So
So I have one question as well, and that question is, how do you leverage the people that you've already conversed with to get introductions to other people you want to speak with, whether it's from a turn them into a customer, an investor, hire them as part of your startup, etc.
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing, I think there's a lot of things, right? I think if it's like hiring, typically your first few hires will be people you know, right? Or people who know you. And I think um, in a market, like a downturn market where people are probably like more willing and they want to stay in like a cushy Facebook, Google job, right? Um, and they care more about valuations now than ever before. Um, I think, yeah, having that network can help, right? Whether you went to, MIT and you can find people there, you worked at Google, you worked at some company that's grown a lot, so there's a lot of like connections you can leverage from that company, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, having like that network. Obviously, if you don't, then you have to learn how to sell yourself and be creative in other ways, right? Obviously, if a company is doing really well, people are more likely to join it, right? And ultimately, like I think the people that are great at hiring, great at even getting investment, are just like the best storytellers, right? I think there's a huge part of that to selling too, but telling the story is a little bit different to a customer versus to a potential investor, right? I think the biggest thing is like in these types of things, like you definitely can't do it alone, and so you need to have like a good network or figure out a way to build that network, and get people to trust you and get people to like you so they can help you, right? Especially earlier on when you're a younger person and you don't have that network, you really have to like spam everyone, do your best, get your face, get your material, get your website in front of people, right? And get them to like genuinely think you're a good person so that they're willing to go out and help you, right? And make intros to people, right? Um, a warm connection is always much better than getting an intro, right? And if you ask a bunch of people for it, like I asked like tons of people for intros, right? And then people are like, yeah, and then I don't know if it happens. There's some people that do it, right? And I guess that's what you're hunting for, right? Like the good souls out there that believe in you or your product or
That's awesome. Yeah. And I'm actually also wondering is like, do you name drop when you're talking to someone else, either from an employee perspective or customer or investor perspective? You say like, I've already conversed with, XYZ person and they're incredibly interested or something like that. So I guess my question is, how often do you name drop and how much of it is bullshit? Because
and does
like,
I
it
think
work?
yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Because like you can also name drop and it's complete BS, but it just intrigues people's interest because they think that
Mhm.
another person is already interested in it.
yeah, I mean like I think you should be like realistic there, right? Like if you're name dropping someone that they're good friends with, then they can also just like ask them, right? Like, what, right? It's funny, right? Because just yesterday we were talking to someone, um, one of some higher level engineering person, and we kind of cold messaged him. We talked to him for like 2 hours, right? And I'm just like, holy crap, this guy's giving us so much information, right? Because one of the
Mhm.
hard things when you're talking to people, just like cold messaging people and trying to like understand their problems, is that a lot of them are like not willing to reveal details about like what their company does, right? And so this guy was just like willing to go into like the deepest like details possible, and I was like surprised, right? And then at the end, he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I talked to like this guy, right? He talked to he was really good friends with another founder who happened to be in our Y-Combinator batch, who we like had known somewhat well, and he like kind of did a reference check on us with that other founder before talking to
Hmm.
us, right? And based on that, he,
Oh,
okay, these guys are like serious. I'll like talk to them and I'll actually tell them something like useful, right? Um, so that kind of stuff happens all the time. Investors are probably the most gossipy bunch of like people out there, right? So it's if you can get like some of them to like you, a lot of them will also want to be interested. And if some of them really don't like you, it might make it harder to get investment from others, right? Um, but yeah, it definitely helps to, yeah, I think you should be a little bit truthful. But there is some like, I think there's some like space to BS it if
Yeah,
you
that's what I was
know.
gonna. Yeah, there was one other thing you mentioned, likability a lot, and it's definitely a pattern in everything you said so far. In your eyes, what does it take to be likable when it comes to, the tech space in general, when it comes to investors and customers, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's just like excitement, right? Excitement and obsession with helping out the person you're working with, right? The customers you're serving. Um, to be honest, I think when you're conversing with like hundreds of people per week, there's all sorts of variation in different types of people, right? So depending on like what type of company you're building, the persona you're servicing, there will be difference, right? Right. So if you're going and like selling something in supply chain, the type of person you're selling to, and they're willing to like use new software and how cautious they are about buying something is going to be very different than like selling to like a tech startup that's like using machine learning, right? And so I think you have to kind of index for that and accordingly adjust like how you speak to them, how you sell to them, how you understand it, right? Some people you can kind of like have one call. I think a lot of Y-Combinator founders sell to other Y-Combinator founders, right? And with them, you can have like one call. You can try selling to them, and you don't push it more. Either they say yes or no, right? With other people, maybe they're more suspicious. Maybe they don't have as much of a network in common with you, or no network, right? And with them, then you have to take a longer period of time and earn their trust. Show them that you're like fighting the good fight, building something that's really useful that they could leverage, right? And not just ripping them off.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So Vishal, just kind of moving forward, I know in the last few months, especially, there has been a macro trend going on, a little bit of slowdown, Fed increasing interest rates, and just a lot more pressure on startups. The question that I have is, are you feeling, or is the community in general feeling a little bit of pressure, and how's that kind of trickling down in your day to day, and what does it look like for you in short term and long term?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, we haven't really felt it that much because we're still pretty
Mm-hmm.
early stage. We're not like growing, right? So whether the market is like doing well or not doing well, I feel like you should be able to get a couple of customers if you're really committed to something and if it's
Mm-hmm.
something potentially big, right? Like there'll always be potentially some customers, right? If what you're doing is like really something, if what you're building is a product that's actually useful and people are willing to pay for it. Um, I'm also more in B2B stuff, by the way. So when I
Same.
speak about things like a lot more, it's like B2B related. But um, I think what's like for a lot of the growth companies, Series B, Series C, Series D, they're like raising massive amounts of money, selling, and just trying to like scale out their sales. That's definitely a problem then now, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think what's more important now rather than ever before in the last like even 8, 9, 10 years, right? Before 2020, 2021 and before is that if you're selling a product, it needs to be like something that's highly important for the organization, right? If you're selling a product to improve a sales organization and helping them make more sales, you need to be like a top 4 or 5 product, right? You need to be you need to be a product that someone would say, yeah, if I go to any company, I'm going to take this product with me, right? And if you're not a top 4 or 5 product, then you'll be cut because people are going to cut their budgets, right? Companies now are more concerned about not just like growing left and right and pumping, raising tons of money, selling as much as possible, but they're more concerned about profits, right? And ensuring that
Mm-hmm.
they're building something that people want. They're building sustainably, right? So their focus is more on a profitable business and proving out earlier on rather than IPOing that they can actually have a sound business model, right? Part of the issues with startups a lot of times is that there's just like funny arbitrage that happens where founders and investors make a lot of money because they've kind of like raised a lot of money, their equity from early on maybe worth a lot, but they never actually cared about profitability until like IPO. And by IPO, founders are like out, investors are out, and only maybe some employees really care then. And then, yeah, then it's kind of like a coin flip, right? Depending on what company
Mm-hmm.
you work for. So I think the dynamics have changed a bit. It does make things more interesting. I think it also makes it harder to find really good ideas, right? And also makes it harder to build really good applications, right? Because you really need to provide like a lot of value. What it means also is that you're not just competing with other like competitors building something similar, but you're also competing with other players like they're just in your general vicinity, right? They're
Right.
maybe not like direct competitors, but are maybe related, right? Because organizations have tight budgets.
So Vishal, I want to switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about things that you'd like to do outside of work, right? So you mentioned about music for kids. I used to record videos or audio music and just used to sell the CDs. What kind of music were you into? Or any instrument that you used to play or anything? Do you want to
Yeah,
talk a little
yeah.
bit more about that?
I was like kind of all over the place, right? So played like piano. Um, I played trumpet. I actually don't know why I decided to do that. I think I did it mostly because our friends were doing it. Um, I then in third grade picked up sitar, and that was like the only instrument that's been constant. Um, and my dad would drive us like an hour south to the South Bay
Hmm.
and stay on Saturday or Sunday mornings. So one day in the weekend usually, and we would wake up at like 6 a.m. right to go to class, right? And so it's kind of hard when you're like 9, 10, 11 years old, right? Waking up that early and going and playing like something like I guess it's hard for like any like 10-year-old, 11-year-old to be like that drawn to any type of classical music, probably, right? Um, but we did it, and so I'm glad that we were able to keep that discipline.
Mm-hmm.
That we kind of developed more of a knack for like classical, semi-classical music, right?
That is
And
that is amazing.
at first we would learn from like the teacher's students, and then eventually we would just learn from him. Uh, um,
And I remember we were talking about it once when I believe we were on a hike on something, that the your guru or the teacher was actually related, or he actually taught Pandit Ravi Shankar, or he was related to him in some way. Like, what was
oh,
that background?
so I guess the history is that our dad learned sitar. My aunt, his sister also had learned sitar.
Hmm.
My grandmother on my dad's side had played sitar, and her younger brother too. So yeah, my grandmother's younger brother, who passed early, very early in his life, he played sitar, right? So this is in the 1960s, and so he learned from Ravi Shankar. Uh, he had Ravi Shankar play at his wedding, right? Which is like
That's
I think that
amazing.
makes like I think he won like the wedding. I think that's like that's the most you can do, right? Get Ravi Shankar
Wow, that
in
is huge. And
play
obviously,
at his
Pandit
wedding.
Ravi Shankar is the most eminent sitar player in the world. So it's like him playing at somebody's wedding.
Yeah,
It's a huge
yeah.
deal.
So yeah, I had the sitar from the 1960s that my grandmother's brother learned from, right? And the make is just very different, right? They have ivory. Uh, it's made of pumpkin, right? Ivory is obviously illegal, but now so you don't have sitars like that, and I think the sitar makers are not quite as good as what they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, amazing instrument. My sitar teacher was really jealous, I think, of that sitar. Um, because I don't think people don't make it like that anymore. And I got to learn from it. So it's like kind of the piece of history that I always remember. It's just like part of my family, right?
That is absolutely amazing. It's like a study various of sitar.
Yeah,
One of the most unique. That is awesome. So, do you still play during like whenever you get time, or is it just sitting around?
yeah. No, I haven't practiced too much this month, but typically we will practice uh, a day or two, maybe more, every week, depending on like. I think at this point it's more about mood and passion, right? I think
That is true.
maybe earlier on, you do it for those things, but you also do it for like college, right? Like, I think it helped that we had like a sitar album, like a Indian classical jazz fusion, right, mix, and we practice a lot, but I think now it's more for passion, more for relaxation. I think the older I've gone, the more I've gone to appreciate like the technicality of things, right, and how thought through it is, right.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Because when you're
awesome.
a kid, yeah, when you're a kid, you can't really focus, right? You're just like running around.
Yeah. So like
But
the passion is cross generational, right? That's what it sounds like. Cross generation, and it continues to live on. That's awesome.
yeah. So yeah, and I think for the first time we actually played like something not like really classical, but we were playing at our cousin's wedding, and we played some mostly older Bollywood songs from the 60s and 70s, 80s, but also some recent ones too in the last 4 or 5 years. So that was the first time that happened, and people were singing along, which usually doesn't happen. Uh, so that was an amazing, that was kind of an amazing feeling to have playing something
Yeah.
different.
Dude, we should definitely jam together sometime as well. I know I love to sing, so and I can bring my guitar. I don't really play well, but
Yeah.
I can try to play along, and it'll be a lot
Uh,
of fun. Just let me know the next time when you're having that. What else? What else do you like to do outside? I know
yeah,
tennis,
no,
which is what we play every Saturday. So,
yeah, I loved playing tennis.
hmm
Yeah, I guess I am giving free tennis lessons to Deepam. It's funny. It's funny. He like invited more people.
Wait, so are you giving them
yeah, I
free
know.
tennis lessons as well?
I hope not.
No, yeah, as we were talking about before, I'm actually bringing his game down, then raising.
Yeah, no,
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 but
Deepam. Yeah, Deepam's really good. Deepam's right-handed, right, and he's really good with his forehands, and he just cannot hit backhands. He hits like a cricket shot, like a sweep, reverse sweep, or cricket shot, right?
no, we have to get. I have to
Yeah,
get better. So we'll definitely get better by
yeah.
the
I
end
mean,
of the
tennis
season.
tennis is a game where, yeah, I guess it rewards like technique and planning, and um, it's not just about like sheer brute force, right?
That is
Um,
true.
and you don't need to be like super tall necessarily to do well. But yeah, you do need to have a good form, good planning. Um, so something that I guess works well for me, and I played a little bit on the high school team as well. I mean, yeah, now I get into other things too, man. It's just like sometimes I play poker. Um, I do like a lot more running and yoga, so that's something I've like gone into. Um,
How good are
it's
you on poker? And I'll tell you why I asked that.
I'm like not that great.
Okay, no, because I was gonna say if you are good at poker, it's like imagine you go into a poker match where the stakes are basically an investment in the startup.
Yeah, I would do
So a
that.
high stakes poker with like equity on the line. It's like, hey, if I win, you gotta invest in the startup.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I know. Yeah, no. Yeah, I think what I've enjoyed more now is yoga. I obviously do like running and weightlifting, but I'm trying to get more into that because I think it's a great combination of like endurance, flexibility, strength, like functional strength. And it looks simple, but it's not, right? And so it's kind of funny to see. I shouldn't say this, but it's kind of funny to see maybe someone that may seem a little bit more out of shape and they're doing it really well, right? And because I think it tests even your breathing and all sorts of all aspects of your fitness, right? So super underrated. I think it's mostly just usually women that do it in a lot of the classes I've seen here, which beats me because I think it's a great way to get in shape.
That is very, very true. All right, Vishal. So this brings us to the next section of our discussion, which is the rapid fire. So as the name suggests, I'll just ask a question and just you have to answer the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So Vishal, tea or coffee?
What kind of tea?
Just generally, like.
Tea.
Okay. All right, mountains or beaches?
Mountains.
Good one. Morning person or night owl?
I want to say neither. I need to sleep early and sleep late. I wake up late. I'll pick morning though.
All right, all right. What's your favorite comfort food?
I like naan and like um some like paneer tikka masala.
You're my type of guy then. That's my favorite as well. All right. What's your favorite virtue in others?
Virtue and others. I think it's honesty.
Hmm. Okay. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Okay, my biggest pet peeve is people being terrible at responding to texts and messages. Being really slow.
That is a good one. I
Like
give you that
I
one.
just like hate it when I have to double text people, and I have a policy now that I'll only max double text you, and after that, like, and if I don't have to double text you regularly, then it's just not gonna work out.
Nice. So
You
like,
seem
what's
hurt,
your
man.
yeah? I was gonna say,
This seems fresh.
what's your typical your time frame? Like when they have to text you back? Is it like 1 day, less than 1 day?
I'd say like a couple of days, a
Days.
week. Yeah, I mean,
A
I could
week. Wow,
understand.
you're generous, bro. A week.
Yeah, so that's a week.
A week seems
Well,
like a lot to me.
Okay. Okay. So, what is one thing that people underestimate you for?
underestimate me for. I think people take me to be like super serious, not too emotional, like not having a soft side. I think I've
Hmm.
probably more of a soft side than like even most average people. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so maybe our
I feel like I
listeners,
made a big confession.
Vishal's friends and followers, I think they should definitely listen to this particular
Yeah.
discussion. You're learning about a different side of Vishal today. So, all
Hey,
right.
it
So,
is
what's your?
unfiltered, right? It is called Your
Yeah,
Life Unfiltered. So
of course,
we're hitting the right notes if we're coming across that way.
for sure, for sure. Okay. The next question is, I was gonna ask, like, what's your biggest accomplishment in the last 1 or 2 years? I think probably something you already know, but
Yeah.
anything else aside from securing funding from Y Combinator?
I think my biggest accomplishment has kind of just like has been more of like a process of just like learning myself actually, right? It's kind of a process and not really accomplishment, but like understanding like my likes and dislikes, like what I really want to do. Is it really software engineering? Is it really founding a company? What space, right? Like what do you actually like, care about? I think those things like I care about what I do for work a lot, right?
Hmm.
I think a lot of people probably go through life just like half-assing a lot of the stuff they do, right? Hobbies, everything else, and so being able to do that is probably the thing I'm more proud of here, right?
That is amazing. Very like kudos to you for being able to do that. All right, so that brings us to the end of the rapid fire, Michelle. Very good, very well taken
Did I get a
answer.
prize? Kito, come on, man.
Bro, your prize is being on the podcast, bro. We're gonna hype it up. We're gonna promote the crap out of it.
Of course,
So
of
it's gonna
course.
lead. We're gonna manifest everything for you, man. You're on the podcast first, then you get more investors, you get more clients, you get more employees, you get everything. All right, we got you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever.
free publicity.
All right, so I think the last question that I have for you today, it's not a rapid fire, but any recommendations for our listeners? And a recommendation could be a book or a TV series or a movie that you've been watching recently, or
Yeah,
just
I
anything.
mean, I think in lieu of I guess whatever discussion today, right? The one book I would recommend is The Mom Test. It's a funny
Hmm.
title. Basically, it's about kind of uh, understanding how to like validate your ideas, your startup ideas, business ideas, being more objective, how to like approach people. Um, Something I think is really important for like even other parts of life too, where you want to really figure out if maybe something you're thinking about is like a big problem, right? That other people also understand. Um, and so
Hmm.
that's a book that like is universally recommended, and I would recommend to like anyone. And I wish I'd read it before. So that's honestly like the one book. Yeah, you should read.
That's
Awesome.
awesome. I have one other question for you, and that
Yeah,
question is, what is next for you, man? So you've done so many things already in a relatively short period of time.
yeah.
What is next?
What's next, man? I just wanna get more customers, keep building. But I think in the general scheme of things, it's kind of funny, right? Because normally, like, I have lived life planning through everything, right? Courses, college, get this job, get more money. but I'm at a place now where I can't really tell you what's going to happen in the next 6 months, right? I probably won't get married, right? But right, I can't tell you like what I'll be working on exactly, right? Like where I'll be, all those things. And I think that's definitely like that's actually kind of freeing that I don't have to set myself and attach myself to some particular milestone when it comes to like my career and even my personal life and what I'm doing, right? So yeah, I guess before if you'd ask, what would give me a clear answer? I think now, at this stage, it's hard, and I think that's honestly actually really fun for me now because I can do anything, right?
Okay, that's a good answer. Yeah, good
So
answer.
thank
Well,
So the
all the
answer,
very best.
yeah, so the answer is I have no answer, but I like that answer actually.
But all the very best to you, Vishal, for your startup as well as all the endeavors and future
yeah,
endeavors that you're gonna
thank you.
undertake going forward. And with that, we can close the discussion today. To all our listeners, if you don't follow us already, feel free to follow us on Instagram. Our handle is Your Life Unfiltered. You can also find us on Spotify. Vishal's company's name is ironleap.io. Is that right, Vishal?
Yes, sir. Iron Leap.
Feel free to reach out to Vishal if you have any leads for him or if you have any questions. I'm sure he'll be able to answer those questions for you.
Yep.
Happy to help.
And if you know anyone in the securities industries or cybersecurity, etc., send those clients to Vishal's way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All of them. He's a great
Yeah.
guy. He'll never disappoint you.
Don't build me up so much. All right, guys.
All
Yeah,
right.
All right.
thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.